Hey y'all, welcome back to MovementLink. So I just want to talk a little bit about what happens when we run out of willpower. I did another video about how to manage willpower, how to keep it high, what to do when you're low, how to get it back up high. And it's not just about having a ton of willpower and using it all the time. It's about conserving it and using it in the right moment. So the other thing we want to keep in mind is that we want to know what happens when we run out of willpower. So we like to think of it as your default. So what do you default to when you run out of willpower? And so something we do in the Momentum program is we work really hard to make those default choices that you really want to make for your life. But just to understand this concept a little bit better, they did a study on parole judges. And what they looked at is how often they granted parole. So on this chart, you can ignore this stuff for right now, but on this chart, about 60% of the time they granted parole up here and 0% of the time they granted parole. So in the video I did about willpower, I talk about a lot of strategies that we can use to replenish your willpower. Some of those strategies are just taking a break, walking around, eating food, these types of things. So what they found was when judges were fresh, when they had high willpower, they granted parole about 60% of the time. Now here's the interesting thing. These red dotted lines going down indicate across the course of a day the breaks that they took. So they granted parole about 60% of the time, and as the day went on, they got down to granting parole just about none of the time as they kind of hit these breaks. So you can kind of see, we talked about what are the things that deplenish your willpower, and it's having to make choices and decisions, and it's stress, and it's all of these things. So we can see that as they're having to make more choices, decisions, get tired, stressed, low blood sugar, yada, 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 they get closer and closer to what their default is. And their default in this scenario tended to be to not grant parole. Then they would take a break, they'd come back from their break, and right back skyrockets back up to the 60% mark again where they're granting parole. And then again, slowly and slowly goes down to almost the 0 mark. They take another break, get back up high. This time they didn't have enough, it's later in the day, to kind of sustain that 60%, and they kind of drop off earlier and have more time there. So much of if people were getting parole, it was so correlated to just the time of day that the judge was in, which is absolutely incredible. So what we can do is, what we need to understand is that when we hit these really difficult, we're lacking motivation, lacking willpower, we really need to control what our defaults are. And if we're trying to make difficult decisions, if we don't know what we're going to eat and we get hungry and we're in this mode, we're going to eat whatever our default is. So we really want to take some time when we're strong to think about the choices we want to make when we're here, and then we want to do the things that we need to do to make these things as easy as possible. Another study that they did is they took two groups of people. They had one group memorize a two-digit number. Very easy to memorize a two-digit number. You don't need to take much effort at all to do that. They took another group and had them memorize a 7-digit number. So that would be like a phone number. So that's something that everyone can memorize, a phone number, but it does take a lot more effort to do. So what they did is, it wasn't really about can they memorize these things. They're just giving them an easy task that they could do and a harder task that they could do. Then what they did is, on the way out, this is where the real study began, they offered them fruit or cake. The incredible thing is the people who had to memorize a 7-digit number were twice as likely to take the cake. So what we're seeing again is, what are your defaults when we've deplenished your willpower? And then when we know that these things happen, we can start making choices for ourselves in the future and start lining ourselves up. So when we get to these I have to make a choice moment, these people had way more willpower. They were able to make a choice that they wanted to make way more often, where these people had diminished their willpower, and now they didn't have enough strength to use to make these choices. So it's not about being disciplined all the time. It's about using selective discipline and selective willpower and just managing this as a resource that we can replenish and that also diminishes. But we just like to know what the big picture is and how different things affect this. All right. We'll continue this talk in future videos, but I hope this brought you some interesting insights. I know I thought this stuff was interesting. All right, talk to y'all soon.